Really nice gentleman. I just met him backstage, and he's very, very gracious and very kind and very respectful, and said allow the families to take as much time as they need to do and say what it is that they need to say. His name is Brent Leigh Sheldon. He's a member of the Oglala Sioux tribe out at Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in southwestern South Dakota. And he's a senior staff attorney at the Native American Rights Fund. His work at the NARF focuses on Indigenous Peacemaking Initiative, boarding school healing work, and sacred places protection. So please welcome Brent Leigh Sheldon.
That was really worth it, hearing from the families. How about one more round for all the families? All the parents really trying hard. That lifts me up. That's why we all do this work, right? To see that happen. So I was honored to wait and hear those stories, actually. I'm looking for, here's the PowerPoint deal. First I want to say, Hami takiepi, chante waste na pechu azaplo na ampetukin le yushki an wahilo. So in Lakota, I called you all by my relatives and said that I offered you a warm heart handshake and said that I'm happy to be here today. And I really do appreciate the invitation. And hopefully what I have to share will help with what you're doing. This is an exciting time to see happen for somebody who does the work that I do, because you're starting with a blank slate on incorporating your First Nation laws and codifying them. So I'm glad to be able to talk today about what we did on my home reserve and how we did that. But you're starting with a blank slate, and we started with some federally provided laws, codes that they dated at about the 1940s overall. We had to throw that off, and I was also talking to Kayla about this. We had to also deal with the people who had been programmed to live under those laws for that long, and bring back our way of doing stuff in codification as well. And that was tough too. In 1940s, I mean, think about how draconian it was back then. And so the laws that were, in existence on our reservation were pretty backwards, I guess, from our standpoint. And we had to allow for all degrees of kind of assimilation into United States culture among our people as well. We've got a full range. We've done really well at maintaining what Jerry would have called ancestral ways of doing things versus traditional earlier today. But also we've had families who've chosen to walk the other way too, so we had to make our laws allow for everybody. But that's what I'll talk about. First off, I should talk about my employer. My employer is a nonprofit law firm. They've been in existence for 49 years now. We'll be celebrating 50 next year. And they've handled a lot of the major litigation over the decades in the United States with respect to protecting Native American rights. There's the 5 priorities that they operate under. So in 1970, the All Native Board decided that these should be the things that the Native American Rights Fund would defend. And I left some little brochures out at the registration desk in case you're interested more. They have a nice web page as well. And I also left a few copies of this legal review. In the States, we have the Indian Child Welfare Act, which basically says that if a Native child comes up for adoption within the state courts, then the judges have to notify the tribes and the family and the Indian family. And so, that's kind of a model, I guess, in a way, or something similar to the Bringing Our Children Home Act. So it's something you may want to look at. There's been some really aggressive attacks over the last 5 to 10 years in the courts in the states, and this talks about some of the efforts to defend that law in court. And so it might be worth checking out. I thought I would bring it in case somebody's interested. When we're talking about child welfare, we're really talking about making things best for the kids. And it's easy to find support for things and information that's already proven in science and social science about what's good. So I listed here some factors that have been found in studies, so it's published, you can use it in court and so on, you can use it in legislative history, backing up legislation that you're advocating for. These sorts of things in a child's life give a child resiliency. There's all sorts of studies like this, but you see, a lot of this should look really familiar if you're rooted in your tribal culture. If a child knows that if my mother and or father loved me, or if they know that others helped my parents or other family members cared about me, and so on, any of these things that child could say is true of their life, that child's going to be better off, and they're going to be more able to handle adversity, more able to handle the bad stuff that happens to all humans from time to time as we grow up. Also, similar factors for healing for everybody, this is children and adults. The more of these things we have in our lives, the better off we are, the more able we are to handle adversity. Looks pretty familiar, a lot of that, as you think with your tribal eyes, right? And in fact, if you can connect with your spiritual and cultural practices, you do better off, you're better off. So studies show that going into a sweat lodge has the same effect as a yoga practice or meditation. In tribal cultures, we have reconnection of relationships as we revive that, using kinship terms to address one another, hugging one another, utilizing our language. All of those things have actually been proven, so we can use it to be beneficial for kids and for adults. And this is all about a matter of worldview. I heard Derek Nepanak really eloquently describe this yesterday. Essentially, we have, on the one hand, rights which are granted by a sovereign and held against others. It's a very hierarchical system. It's basically about where do I stand within that system and what am I entitled to and what does somebody else have over me. That's the legal system that we're dealt with. That's kind of our shared heritage in the United States and Canada. But also, on the other side, we have our tribal way of doing things. It's called natural law a lot of times. It's really all about relationships and learning those relationships. It's about respect. It's about reciprocity. You think more in terms of we than you do in terms of I, from that standpoint. And so we're really dealing with a system that's from a foreign worldview and trying to make room for our own worldviews to operate more fully or more healthily. So that's what we were faced with when we enacted this law, when we wrote this law. This law came to pass because of the hard efforts over about a 3-year period of a panel of elders from our people who had a lot of patience. I got to participate because I was an attorney. I was good at writing, so I could write the legal stuff that we needed. We had a special challenge of we had to include certain stuff in order to continue to receive federal funding for our child welfare programs. So we had to have things that were pretty objectionable from a cultural standpoint, like we had to have a provision for termination of parental rights. Well, our elders hated that idea, right? That's counter. That could never even happen. So we had to, it took about 6 months for us to talk through how could we do that still. And what we ended up with was we had all the stuff that we needed to have the federal examiners check the proper boxes so we'd be able to continue to get our funding to support our families, basically. But we also created room for cultural recovery within this. Now, I want to point out, you can see the worldview difference right here. These Lakota words, Wakainja na Tiwahe Tawope. Wakainja is children, Na is and. Tiwahe is a nuclear family. They live together in the household, so it's a household family. Tawope can get translated into English as their laws. So this is the laws for the children and the families. But Wope is actually a character in our creation stories as well. And Wope is basically feminine beauty personified in that character. So this is really what makes a beautiful life for children and nuclear families. So there you have the worldview difference going on. This isn't a command forward. This is more of a beauty. How do we move forward? It's an inducement for how to make healthy children and families. I pulled from the table of contents because we had these two purposes, meeting the federal requirements so we could get our funding, plus bringing in our tribal ways of doing things. And also our elders wanted us to lay out our tribal ways really clearly in English so that those members of our communities who had lost their way, maybe lost their language and a good deep understanding of Lakota language, non-Lakota first speakers, English first speakers. So it's a really long code. And we laid out a lot of details. I pulled from the table of contents some relevant pieces that I thought might be interesting to learn about. And I'll make this whole presentation available to you guys. I'll give it to the FNFAO, so they'll put it on their website. But I'll also have business cards. Come and get me, and I'll be glad to email you if you email me and ask for it. There's a lot of text on the slides that follow. That's usually bad PowerPoint form, but I thought I need to show it to you, so that's the best I could do. If you look in here, though, section 401, the first one there, 401.5, we say Oyate Tawope, that's the people's laws, again, if you want to put it in English. We set out traditional laws that are going to govern decisions affecting children. We set those as a priority. It's going to be our traditional laws that go first. I'll show you that language in a little bit. Also in our definition section, we had Lakota kinship defined. Then we also had Lakota definitions, which were some concepts that the elders thought it was important that we put in the code for people to understand in English, so we defined them in English. And then Washichuto Wowiwanke is the white people's laws, or the white people's definition. So it's the stuff that we had to have in the code. It's some of the stuff we had to have in there. You have to define parental rights, you have to define certain hearings and so on. So that's a box checking sort of a section there, and it helps functionally too. But anyway, different types of definitions, really important, and we set it out that way. And then, really importantly, when we start talking about children's and families' rights, notice that we're not talking about parental rights at all. That's the groundwork of this code, is it's reframing it. We have Wakainja Tawoashake. There again, Wakainja is children, Ta is theirs, and Woashake is the state, the thing that makes them strong or gives them the state of strength. So instead of really children's laws, it's really these things make the children strong. So it's what we owe to the children. And similarly, Tiwahe na Tioshpai Ta Woashake 403.2, that's the small, the nuclear family, Tiwahe. Na Tioshpai is extended family. Their thing that makes them strong. So what do we have in these rules that makes nuclear families and extended families stronger with respect to children? And then finally in section 405 we had the traditional resolution of child and family issues. We explain it a little bit there, and we say that we have a preference, a legal preference for traditional resolution, and then we go on to describe it. So that's kind of laying the groundwork of some things that we put into this code that were helpful, and it's showing you how we started it out to make it a priority. And you can see the worldview differences going on. Now here are some of the traditional children's rights, the things that make children strong. And this is from our elders. They thought these were the most important things. A child has a right to a mother, a father. That means to have a relationship with them, right? To have somebody in that role with those children. They have a right to identify with the traditional way of life. They have a right to learn and speak their language. A bigger family and a small family, a nuclear family. They have a right to know all of their relatives. So this is laying it out. This is what everybody has the responsibility. Remember the 3 R's in the worldview difference chart. We have a responsibility to provide these for children, and our systems should pursue this, is what we decided. Here's another piece that I thought was maybe interesting. This is where we say that the code is going to use traditional laws, and those are going to have the priority in deciding children issues. I thought this was a beautiful paragraph. The elders really helped us write this one. Paragraph A, this code reincorporates familial practices retained, sometimes even unknowingly, by our people. We have retained many traditional practices in spite of a history of attempts to outlaw or prevent the practice of our culture. These practices are rooted in our history and our language, and they arose naturally over a long period of time, or as gifts from Wakantanka, kind of the creator, to aid in harmonious living with each other in our natural world. That's natural law there, and I think that's a beautiful way to explain it in English, and this is why we hold on so hard to our cultural ways of doing things, because they've been given, they've been proven, and we retain them. So even if you don't even speak your language, I'll bet your family acts like Indians in a lot of ways. I remember when I went to college, I didn't really know too much, and I didn't really know other Indians, but I met some in college, and I noticed that their families laughed a lot, and guess what, 20, 30 years later, doing all this work with Native families, Indians like to laugh. What do you know, right? And whether you speak your language or not, you still like to laugh. And how long you've been living in the city and not, you still like to laugh. So there's a lot of stuff like that. And guess what? Laughter's healing. I learned that one later in my 20s, dude, right? Laughter and tears. Also look at section B. The following traditional laws shall be considered and reinforced where the future of a child is decided or influenced, including in processes governed by this code. So we're going to go to the traditional laws, even if we're in that track of procedures that the federal government requires us to have in order to get our funding. And also, approximate English translations are provided, but the Lakota terms shall govern. I think that's pretty cool that they put that in there, or that we put that in there, because it all goes back to the Lakota. And so if there's some sort of a conflict, we go back and we have somebody think about it in Lakota if we don't think about it that way. And we have them help us, apply things from that worldview. Now, this next piece follows after what I just read out to you out of the previous slide. And so you see faithfulness or prayer is one of the things that we said is going to continue applying. And so we were able to list our 7 main ceremonies here and say that that's part of what children have available to them, and the things that come from these ceremonies are going to be applicable in child welfare decisions. So this is how you get it into English, into a code, right? Some more things on that list are some more of our traditional laws. Given in Lakota first, like we said, Lakota has primacy or is primary, but the English is provided to help people understand what that might mean. But all said and done, eventually it means English. And I always like to point out, there's one of these that I always wonder about. Number 4, Wowachin Tanka, says fortitude. Well, I don't really get the concept of fortitude very well in English anyway. It sounds like an archaic word, and the only thing I can think is like a fort, like something made strong or whatever. But if you pick it apart, Wowachin Tanka, to me, it's more like persistence. It's something like, if you take the pieces apart, it's something like the state of wanting something really bad. In other words, that's your drive. That's what gives you persistence. And so I see how they got fortitude maybe in the 40s or something when somebody made a list. But to me, that's more like persistence. And so having that Lakota primacy gives clarity around a concept, because it may be that the English doesn't translate as well for everybody. Okay? Another thing that I think, I added this in because I thought this might be really important to you guys as you move forward. Subject matter and personal jurisdiction is in 404.2. This is actually personal jurisdiction. I pulled just that part, and that's what's quoted below. We went for jurisdiction over everybody that we could think we might plausibly be able to make a case over. And so certain of these are easy, and we listed each one with specificity so that we could pull it out if it looked like we would have a legal challenge in the courts that was going to sacrifice jurisdiction for all of the nations within the United States. If we have one bad precedent, then everybody suffers, and we wanted to leave ourselves the option to pull something out in case it got challenged, basically. But we did reach as far as we could, feasibly reach. So we let tribal, or what would you say, band members, we have jurisdiction over them, especially even if they live outside of the reservation, which we generally would have. And I think that that's probably an essential way to take care of your children, is to assert jurisdiction over them wherever they live, or the right to have a say in their lives. It might be that we would have concurrent jurisdiction sometimes over some of the kids who are remote, so that a state court might also have jurisdiction, and that's the way it generally works out in our legal system. I'm not sure how it'll end up here, but you'll want to watch for that and definitely learn from how you could do stuff better than they've done it south of here. We also, in number 2, assert jurisdiction over all children transferred to the court pursuant to the Indian Child Welfare Act. So that's if a child comes up for adoption in a state court and they get transferred to our court under that act, then we're going to have jurisdiction this way. And any Indian living within our boundaries, so that's not just our own band members, but it's any Native child, and any non-Native child living within our original boundaries. Our boundaries have been arguably reduced a little bit in court cases. So we're going to go ahead and make a claim to our original boundaries, because that's what they gave us in our treaty in the first place. And if they're living in a member of our tribe's home, then we're going to extend jurisdiction to them. And you can see the argument why. If we're taking care of the child, then our people ought to be able to take care of that child. Any person causing a child to come within our jurisdiction, so that gives us jurisdiction over an adult who may be concerned to a child. And then any unborn child in need of protection or services, and the expectant mother of such unborn child. So that we have some drug problems on the reserve, and so that gives us a way to intervene if it looks like a mother might be endangering an unborn child. that she's carrying. And then similarly, number 7, an Indian male coming under the provisions of section 406.24. That's the unborn child at risk section. So we put a responsibility on the father as well to try to intervene for the child, or try to help the mother basically stop doing what's endangering the child, because it's his child as well. And then non-members who have basically come under our jurisdiction in any other way, like being on our reserve and conducting business with us or whatever. So catching jurisdiction is pretty critical, and this is a way that we approached it, working within the framework of the United States federal system. Here again, the clean slate is pretty exciting to me to see. I know it's probably nerve-wracking to have to go through all of this and thinking about jurisdiction. And I'm looking forward to the discussion towards the end of the day, if it happens, about jurisdiction, about asserting jurisdiction. But man, you can go for a lot. So eager to see how it all works out. And I'm so excited to be making relationships up this way so that I can help any way I can, and so that I can watch as it all goes on. That's it. I want to say Wopila. Thank you is how that one gets translated. A lot of times it really means there's a state of honoring. You've listened to me for this time and sat quietly, and I appreciate it. I'm honored to even be able to be here and humbled by it, so I appreciate it. The Indigenous Peacemaking Initiative is what brought me up to Winnipeg for the first time about a month ago. That's a lot of the work I normally do. We have a website, peacemaking.narf.org, where we talk about that stuff, but this was just a leftover slide with contact information that I put on the end. I wanted to leave it open for a few minutes for discussion and questions. I'll let our MCs have kind of the time responsibility on that, but I'm open and available. I'm also open and available. I'll be here the rest of the day too, so if anybody wants to talk, please come up. That's why I'm here. All right, thank you. And any questions or comments? There's mics, I see them in the audience. Thank you.
They're a shy bunch.
We're good. He says you're a shy bunch. Is that what it is? It's also after lunch, and I'm talking about code, and I'm putting up these slides of this 10-point font. But anything you want to talk about? Yeah, I'm available too. I think the important thing is making relationships, and I'm available. FNFAO will know how to reach me. I'll give them any information that I can provide to them. So that's it, and I appreciate your time again.